I'm an addict alcoholic. I am also a family member affected by someone's addiction, and I'm also in long-term recovery from a mental health diagnosis. So I get to check a lot of boxes, right? And so for a long time, I thought that that was something that was my kryptonite. I was trying to think of the right reference. I know there are probably Marvel or whatever fans out there, so I don't want to screw up the reference. But I know that it's a superpower now, right? And I know that I'm not alone. But I started out in a very, just a second, I'm gonna do this because I don't want to go over. I told Adam I can do like 15 minutes or I can do an hour, and if I don't set a timer, I'm gonna do one or the other. So I grew up in a family very near here, well, not near here, but in the vicinity. I drive all over the metro, so I guess it's a frame of reference. I'm all over. So I grew up in Johnson County. My entire family is from Ohio, so go Buckeyes. Yeah, and so my family is highly affected by addiction, but we would never say it, and for a long time they didn't really even know it. When I was a kid, my dad was looked up to not just by me, but by the community. I was a preacher kid, so shout out to preacher kids too. And he was someone that wanted to, in his younger life, break cycles, and he knew that his family of origin had a lot of things that were just not kind and loving and aligned with his values, and if he wasn't drinking, that's who you would meet and know and admire. And if he was drinking, all bets are off, right? He could still possibly be that person, or it got really, really scary. A lot of rage, a lot of yelling, a lot of codependency, a lot of, we only talk about the good stuff. It all needs to look good, right? And when I was about 8, my uncle died of an opioid overdose. Now, we're just starting to talk about those kind of things, and it's been, an issue for some time, but back then it was, especially my family, but culturally, just not talked about. And I was really surprised now to reflect back on that we even, oh, you have a timer up there. I just realized that. That's amazing. I'm going to turn this one off. I'm a visual person anyway, so thanks, whoever did that. And so it's amazing to me that we even kind of named it, but we definitely didn't really talk about it, right? So my mother's side of the family was rocked by that. My grandmother had guilt and shame associated with that. And so all of that, right, was going on, and kids know, right? They're always going to pick up on that. So I remember feeling really isolated as a kid and lonely. And I also had a lot of gifts. I was really privileged to have a lot of gifts where I, grew up and where I was raised. I never went without, the staples of things. My parents did love me very deeply. They were doing their best, right? But I just remember my first drug of choice. I realized this during the pandemic because I went back to that drug of choice, was perfection and control and people pleasing. So I'm a recovering people pleaser. I'm a recovering perfectionist, all of those labels as well. And so we know that perfection isn't attainable, and it's definitely not sustainable, right? And so, as you know, I told you, I have a mental health diagnosis as well. So that anxiety and depression that reared its head as a teenager, I had suicidal thoughts my senior year, and there was a moment in which I was going to make an attempt. And I have always believed, bless you, I've believed very deeply that I am not alone. I know that there is a God. I'm really grateful. One thing my dad did do very well was he said, babe, this is all the stuff that I know, and it's up to you to decide, what you believe. And for a lot of us growing up, we didn't have that experience, right? That church hurt might have started young. That church hurt was later for me, But that was really important to me because I could be curious about that connection. And so I had that connection with a higher power. And I remember reaching out to God in that moment and saying, God, I need to see something because I can't do this, right? I can't do this alone is what the end of that sentence would be. And the phone rang, and it was my mom. And so there are these moments throughout my story that I just kept trying to deny the fact that I should be alive over and over and over again. It just was too much on my own, right? And I kept having these really loud moments from God saying, it's not it, right? And so I went into college, and I was just this raw nerve, and I found alcohol maybe 3 days in. I don't even know if it was that long. And so these alcohol and drugs that I had been so terrified of, I was like, why not, right? So the first night I drank, cops were called. First time I drank, I blacked out. And I remember this feeling that I had only felt in church, that I had only felt when I had had spiritual experiences connecting with God and feeling Christ move inside of me. I felt that night. I had a clear thought that I know why people give everything for this. And I found out that's not normal. I found out normal drinkers don't have that experience. But it was a spiritual experience that first time I used. And as many of us, I chased that. And I might have found it in moments. It escalated very quickly for me. So I know a lot of us go to AA or in 12-step programs, and they talk about how it's fun. The progression, it's fun, and then it's fun with problems, and then it's just problems. And it was problems immediately for me, right? Cops were called. It was campus police. It escalated after that, but initially it was just campus police saying, cut it out, And I was in the Conservatory of Music. I'm a musician, so shout out to the musicians tonight. You guys were wonderful. So I studied classical vocal performance at the UMKC Conservatory, and that is exactly how it sounds, a very scary environment. Beautiful, right? And a lot of very talented, kind, loving people, but very high standards. And I already had impossibly high standards. So I don't know if you know this, but classical musicians like to party too. And so it was a culture that I was using, right? And it didn't stand out. And so I got to do amazing things. Like I said, I was very privileged. But my bottom started, unlike some of you, in Austria. There were no babysitters there. It was just no holds bar. And so it's a beautiful, shame-filled experience, right? And so when I came back, I dropped out of school. I couldn't make it out of my dorm room. It was my apartment by then. Just horrible panic attacks. I would get ready for a class. I would get ready for a coaching. I just couldn't leave. And it just escalated from there. And when I dropped out, I became a bartender, right? So there were people using just like me, and I had surrounded myself to that effect. And so for me, it was, there's so many stories I could give you, right? Like ending up in the hospital because I had passed out on a party bus that I was nervous to even get into because I knew it was going to be a mess. But why not get on, right? Maybe it'll be okay. And waking up in a hospital bed and looking up at my dad at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning when he needs to be preaching, however many hours later. And my parents didn't know what to do. The community didn't know what to do. And I thought I had found the key to it all, right? And so I got what I thought only addicts and alcoholics got, which was arrested. And I got a DUI, and I spent the night in jail. I was a risk to myself. I was trying to self-harm, all the things. I was that girl in jail that night. I was that white chick in jail. And I had these two conflicting feelings that I would go between. It was, they were after me, and how could they have done right? And I wasn't doing anything wrong. as I'm hitting signs in the McDonald's parking lot, because that's exactly what I did each night, right? Partied until about 2 a.m. and then ended up getting a cheeseburger. And the other side was looking at these bars. Like, I have this visceral memory of looking at these bars and saying, thinking, not saying, but just thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do if I get out of here. Like, there is such a mess out there, and I don't even know where to start. So I swore I wouldn't drink for a year. I would learn how to drink and use drugs responsibly and get everybody off my butt. And that's how I walked into my first AA meeting. There was an angel that I worked at the bar with. I didn't know she was an angel. I just knew she was really kind. Laureen is her name. And she said, how are you going to not drink for a year? All the people you know use drugs or alcohol. I said, I don't know. I didn't think that far, right? And she said, I heard of this great group on the plaza called Unity. And that was my home group. I didn't know it at the time, right? But I walked up the stairs, and I heard people that didn't look like me. It was a bunch of older white guys, no offense, that I didn't want to have anything in common with, right? And they were speaking about their alcohol and drug use like it was an intimate relationship like I had had for these, 6 years that I'd been using, because I came in at 23. And so there's something beautiful about that, and there's something very difficult about that, as many of you young people know that are trying out recovery. And it was just, I'd never heard a man be vulnerable unless in another type of intimate relation. I mean, this was incredible. This was magical to me. And I just kept coming back. It was just, they loved me. They said they loved me, and they didn't need anything back. If I had $1, they'd take it, but that was about it, right? And they said, I'll love you until you can love yourself. And again, right? And that was like the hitch. I was like, oh, I don't think I've ever done that, right? Like, I always needed to be better or different, or somebody needed to be happy for me to be okay. And so that was really huge turning point for me. And the next turning point was about 57 days later, when somebody said something about marijuana maintenance in a meeting, and I was like, oh, I do that too. And I'm actually, I went up to my friend Chris later, and he was like, ooh, I was just joking. You need to talk to your sponsor about that. And I'm really grateful. I was really mad because I was like, I thought I was sober, right? And if you're doing that, God bless you, right? It's all about reducing some kind of harm, right? And I think God was doing for me what I probably couldn't have done for myself. I don't think I could have done them both at once, because I was self-medicating that depression and anxiety daily with marijuana. And it was hard enough to just imagine life without alcohol daily. I still wasn't thinking forever, and I was only thinking for a year daily, right? And I remember that was on a Saturday morning when Chris said that, and Sunday at 6, I walked up those stairs, and I said, I don't want a first step meeting, but I haven't been sober, and I need a 24-hour coin. And I went all in. I'd never done anything 100%, and I drank the Kool-Aid, and I did it 100%. And what I would recommend is what was recommended to me, was 90 meetings in 90 days. So I'm changing those habits. I found a sponsor that had what I wanted eventually, right? I had 2 sponsors first that were kind of comfy, but it wasn't the right fit. And then there was a woman that it's like dating, right? Like, to ask out somebody for sponsorship. I'm not great at dating. I mean, I'm so grateful to be married. He drives me nuts, but I don't have to date anymore, so that's good. And it was brutal. And she even had to kind of ask me out. She was like, how are you doing? And I was like, I'm horrible. I don't have a sponsor right now. And she's like, do you want me to sponsor you? I've always wanted you to sponsor. It was very dramatic, because I am very dramatic. And she's been my sponsor for 15 years now. October 10th, 2009 was my last drink or drug. And it's entirely by the grace of God and the 12 steps and, sponsorship. And then I got to sponsor women. And man, if that doesn't make you drink, sponsoring other people. And that's how it works, right? I remember my first sponsee went back out, and I knew she was going to die, and I knew it was my fault. and both things were wrong, right? My sponsor's husband, he was like, B, are you still sober? I said, yeah. And he's like, then it worked, right? That's part of our recovery, is giving it back, whether somebody's going to take it or not, whether they need it from you or not, and sometimes it's just planting a seed, and we don't get to see what grows. And sometimes, man, we get to see what grows, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing. And so I met my husband in recovery. I did what I swore I would never do, which is date one of you all. And I did that a couple times. Dating in recovery is not for the faint of heart. Sitting in a room with someone that you have previously dated and are no longer dating is brutal. But I will say, if you think you're going to leave your home group because you broke up with someone, they don't get, I remember being told that, like, I can't go back there, right? And it's like, why would you give them your home group over this, right? You both deserve those seats. You both have earned them. And so if you still feel safe, and it's a feeling, not a fact, whether you feel in danger. If you are in danger, go to a different meeting. But if you're not, please keep going back to your home group. So like we were talking about, in recovery, life doesn't stop, which is a beautiful thing, right? I met the love of my life in recovery, and it's really cool because I was 23 and I started trying to date people my age that were drinking, and that was horrible. And then I started dating some people in recovery, and that was horrible too. And then I did my, my sex inventory, right? I looked at what I needed in a partner, and I looked at what I couldn't, deal with in a partner. And I prayed on that, and I dated myself for 6 months, which is what my partner told me to do, and it was brutal. But I had a dog, so that was helpful. I really recommend, if you're single, having an animal, because I just could snug him at night, right? And so it was just this beautiful thing where I could date myself, and I could get better connected with Christ, and I could do the things that really filled my heart with joy and were God's will for me, without checking to see, like, is this what we do, right? No, this is what I get to do. And the we was the group, right? And so chosen family is a huge part of my recovery. I love my family of origin very much. And then when I started my family with Denny, I started realizing that the cycles that I watched my dad say he was going to break, and then I keep saying I'm going to break, I kept doing them, right? Because we talk about HALT, we talk about hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and that is real, right? And it will take people out in a hot minute, but it will also proliferate things that we don't intend to continue. And it's not my job to break all the cycles. I have now learned that, right? But the cycles that I can break, it's been super helpful to be in family recovery. And so I started family recovery about 10 years after I should have, right? But I started it. And I became a newcomer again, which my ego did not like, but needed, right? And so AA saved my life. The 12 steps are used in both programs, which was super helpful, but in different ways. Like, I don't have to pick up a drink or a drug. I don't have to, be a dry drunk. I don't have to be all those things thanks to AA. And I have people that help me not pick up. And then in Al-Anon, I get relationships. I don't take hostages anymore. Sometimes I do when I get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? And I get far from those spiritual principles of this program, right? But then I get to recognize and reassess and be self-aware. And I was just recently listening to a podcast today on grief, actually. I don't know if anybody's listened to Anderson Cooper's All There Is. It's amazing, and it's super helpful for grief recovery. And we have grief from so many different things, right? Substances, people we've lost in here, people we have lost but they're still alive. I mean, all these different ways in which we grieve. And so it was interesting. She was talking about how she, wants to just crawl in the skin of her loved one and do things for them. And I identified with that a lot, right? And I've been in Al-Anon for 6 years now. And it's just been this amazing gift, right? It tells me that I can be okay if somebody isn't okay. Talks a lot about expectations, right? Acceptance isn't about condoning something. It's whether or not I'm going to continue to give it power or my energy. And I didn't cause it, I can't cure it, and I can't control it. And that's my addiction, that's your addiction, that's any actions of yours. And when you're parenting, woof, that is so nice to have, but so difficult to do. And so 8 years ago, October 10th, or 29th, sorry, October 10th is my recovery date. A lot happened in October. October 29th, I had my first child, and that was something really, really beautiful and also really terrifying, right? And, living amends to myself, like during that process, I heard a lot of birth stories, lots of birth stories, right? And I got to choose, right, like how I wanted to even just start that. Like, I remember how important it was to get pregnant. I don't know if anybody has had kids in here in recovery, but how important it was to get pregnant. And that took us a minute because it wasn't immediate. And so I had to work the steps on that. And then as soon as I was pregnant, I had this epiphany that, oh my gosh, I have to give birth to this kid. And it was just like, oh my gosh. And some woman very, generously was like, you know what? It's fine. You just get an epidural and you're numb. And y'all, I stopped getting numb October 10th, 2009, and then I was really screwed because I was like, if this is the, magic. So it was amazing to get to talk with other women, just like I did in recovery, and talk about what my experience might be. And so my partner and I get to do that. And sometimes we take that as an opportunity, and sometimes, it weighs really heavy on us. But it's just this beautiful, beautiful thing that I work those 12 steps in my parenting. I work those 12 steps, with my kids, even though they don't really know it yet. And I'm sorry in advance, that they have to continually hear me harp about honesty. I have an 8-year-old that just learned how to really lie. And, that's been hard. And then I had a daughter, and that was really baffling. I didn't share this, but part of my recovery is also recovery from childhood sexual trauma. And so I thought having her would be the thing that triggered that the most, but it was actually seeing my son at the age that it began and seeing just how tiny he was and just how beautiful he was. And I had a huge resentment against God that I didn't know was there. And for a minute, I just couldn't connect. And that was really scary. I think that was probably one of the scariest things in my recovery is when that connection got silent, right? Because that relationship has changed, but the way it feels in my body has always been the same. And I didn't have that for a while because I just couldn't connect. And so I just want anybody to know that if you're struggling with that connection, if there's a resentment against your higher power, that you're not alone, and it will get different. And for me, it was actually for a while changing my higher power's pronouns, funny enough. Like saying she for a while was exactly what I needed. I could feel that kind and loving grace from a more feminine energy. And today I don't need that. My higher power's pronouns are they. So it was this really cool, evolution for me. And that might not be the hang up, but whatever it is, if it's church hurt, if it's whatever, just know that can get different. And it got wildly different. In the last few minutes, I'll share, professionally, I started working in recovery about, 7 years ago, which I swore I would never do, right? You get sober and everybody becomes an alcohol and drug counselor. And I was like, absolutely not. I will be with you all in meetings. I will, have dinner with you all. We had sober kickball team. That was great. And then I want my own bubble over here that isn't filled with crazy sober people. And it's so funny because all my bubbles are filled with crazy sober people now and family members in recovery. And what a gift, right? What a gift. And so that started, I was a counselor, or I was a peer specialist on a crisis line, and then I became an advocate. And then I became an alcohol and drug counselor, and like you heard, I work for Church of the Resurrection, and I would never become a pastor, right? I saw my dad do it really, really well, and then really, lose his way, and that really scared me. And God has to be really loud for me, and I think they know that. It was just super loud. I spoke at Resurrection very similar to this and shared my story, and Tom reached out and said, hey, do you want to apply for this position that we have that's opening? Did you know about that? But you'd have to become a pastor. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, it's just this crazy, I thought I was going to go into chaplaincy at one point in my recovery. I lost a grandmother, and we went through hospice, and if you've sat, vigil or bedside, that very uncomfortable but very holy space, during that time. And I watched all these pastors, which we know a ton of pastors, right? And they are cycling through as quickly as they can get out of there, some of them. And I was like, isn't this like your job? Like, shouldn't you be comfortable in here? So I didn't realize that that was a gift that God had given me, that I felt not comfortable, but I felt that I could hold that space. I had the capacity to hold that space for people. And I wouldn't have been able to do that without being able to hold the space that we do in these spaces, in support groups, in rooms like this. And so when he said you'd have to become a pastor, I was like, well, I wanted to, but it didn't work out. But did it? And so Tom and I will be like, this is weird, but is it? And we'll take turns saying that. And so it's just this beautiful thing that you guys taught me, like more will always be revealed, right? If I just don't pick up a drink or drug, if I just keep doing the next right thing, if I listen for God's will, and I try, and I can trust that inner knowing today. And it's because of all these people in these rooms that were there for me and continue to come in and teach us all things. And I just want you all to know that I'm grateful that you're here. I'm so grateful I got to speak tonight. I did not think that at 8 o'clock this morning, but I'm so grateful to be here tonight because I know this is such a tough time for so many of us. And I just love you. And I'm just so proud of all of us and the work that Christ is doing in all of us. And I'll pass.